Ooh, patch time. So 6.2 has been out for about a week, give or take, a day or so, which means I'm going to give my thoughts because I want to. I'll be upfront, this patch wasn't quite as exciting as patch 6.1. Now, that's not to say this was a bad patch. By all accounts, this patch was very, very good. I just think it was missing that post-Endwalker hype that 6.1 benefited from. That being said, I had a lot of fun this patch, and might as well talk about that. As per usual, I want to talk about the design and mechanical side of things before I get too deep into the narrative discussion. For the MSQ, we got a dungeon and trial added. The Fell-Code of Troya is a very visually interesting dungeon. There are very contemporary feeling areas such as the initial twisting dungeons and the castles and tiers, which show off how proficient the dungeon design team have gotten with each coming patch, as well as spaces that harken back to classic A Realm Reborn duties, such as the initial boss pit and the upper terraces seen at the end of the dungeon. In terms of bosses, I'd say Troya is 2 for 1. The initial boss was fine mechanically, but just kind of uninteresting visually. Fighting the same enemy at different sizes and health pools has never been cool or fun. They're just kind of boring to look at. The middle and end bosses, however, are substantially more enjoyable. The second boss was especially cool. For the longest time, glare markers have been fairly plain in their implementation. If the boss has a spooky eye marker, simply don't look at its 5-head. This time we've got some funky timed and synced glares, just to keep players up on their toes. I don't want to talk too much about the third boss due to spoilers, but I'll say the fight, while not the most mechanically complicated, was very cool from a visual and thematic unity standpoint. And again, for the sake of avoiding spoilers, I'm not going to mention who the trial is, but I'll say the fight is sick, and it makes some fantastic use of the fettered mechanic. Now, if you want to find both style and substance, the new Pandemonium tier, Abyssos, was just a ton of fun. P5 and 7 were especially cool mechanically. I like the use of the reflection mechanics during P5, and P7's wild-looking boss design and backstory made it for great set dressing for a very cool fight. Now, as I prefaced earlier, this patch didn't feel quite like it had the same amount of energy as 6.1, and I think that's mostly due to a section immediately following the Troya dungeon itself. It's a section in which you wander around the castle talking to NPCs. Now, don't get me wrong, I think getting a chance to talk with the castle's denizens and get a bit more world building is great, but I really don't like how it's executed here. Instead of having designated spaces to explore and chat, you're instead expected to walk through the mostly empty dungeon environment looking for very specific NPCs to advance the story. What makes this so unappealing is that you have to repeatedly walk up and down the castle, retracing your steps to find the odd character that just so happens to be important now. To further frustrate things, the instant transitions have been disabled, requiring players to actively click a glowing spot to move from one area to another instead of just walking through the glowing dots. Certainly not the most fun I've had playing the game, if I'm being quite honest. Alright, from here on out we're going to be getting into the story stuff, so be prepared for a discussion of content containing spoilers for the patch 6.2 Buried Memory main scenario quest, as well as the Pandemonium Abyssos raid story. If you've yet to finish one or either of these stories, then I'd recommend skipping this section of the video entirely and heading to my final thoughts. It should be the last chapter in the video. With that out of the way, I'll start with one of the biggest hitters first. Xenos' return isn't happening, and I've never been happier. If you happen to be one of the few people who caught my thoughts on 6.1, you'll remember my fearful prediction that the appearance of Xenos' avatar at the end of the patch was foreshadowing his return in a later part of the MSQ. Luckily, that didn't happen, and instead we got a brand new character added to the cast, Zero. With the main scenario fully entering the Exploring the 13th part of the adventure, it only figures that we need some sort of guide to help us find our way through an unfamiliar world. Zero's role isn't just a guide, however. Due to the narrative importance of her being the first friendly enough face we meet in the Void, she also has the very difficult writing job of providing much-needed world building and exposition. As is expected of Ishikawa's writing, this is expertly handled through a careful balance of character restriction and measured distribution of information, allowing the audience to get lore and world building at a pace consistent with her newly established character, while not feeling too drawn out and lengthy. Zero's introduction also helps to establish the cold and unforgiving nature that prevails the whole of the Void. Whether it be the precarious reliance on ether that all denizens of the Shard endure, or the cruel economy that surrounds this precious resource, the dev team have done an incredible job of bringing a complicated and nuanced life to what was originally thought to be a domain of mindless monsters. On the subject of monsters, Golbez is beginning to look like a proper force of evil. From the underlings he employs to his tyrannical campaign of conquest, the Man in Black looks to be a very classic interpretation of the original Final Fantasy IV antagonist. So far, we've only gotten bits and pieces of his motivation and desires, but if he has ties to the Contra Memoria and 13th Warriors of Light, I'm very excited to see where the direction this is going. Let's just hope they don't adapt his character too faithfully and randomly introduce some purple dude who's been pulling the strings all along. I've also really been enjoying the Voidsent adaptations of the 4 elemental archfiends, or the ones we've seen thus far. Scarmiglione, more closely resembling Amano's original design, is always a welcome choice the 14 team leads towards, and his self-centered, grimy nature made for a good introduction to what we should expect from the rest of the fiends. Self-serving crazy people who only care about themselves. We see a similar nature from Barbaricia. While she's substantially less gross than her Earth aspected compatriot, she shares his pride and greedy nature, freely taking and demanding whatever she desires. Barbaricia's trial was a much welcome departure from her usually effeminate portrayal, all floaty and hair. I much prefer her going full Bayonetta and punching us into pieces, as opposed to just kind of like casting wind at us. I'm personally really excited to just see how they bring Cagnazzo and Ruby content into the story, whether or not they're accurate to their appearance in 4, or if they're just like entirely new takes, which I assume is going to be like a combination of the two, but it should be interesting anyways. I want to punch the big turtle man. Alright, with those positives in mind, it is a tiny bit concerning how quickly we dispatched 2 of Golbez's elite guard. While Scarmiglione was referred to as the weakest of the 4, we dispatched Barbaricia fairly swiftly as well. This isn't to say I want the last 2 to stick around for a prolonged period, I'm just kinda worried we're going to be hit with a Final Fantasy IV reference and have them all resurrected out of nowhere just because. In other pacing news, it looks like we cleared out all of Pandemonium. I was not at all expecting the subversion of seemingly defeating the main antagonist of the raid in P8, but I do think it's a very welcome change to what had started to become the normal raid formula of fight your way through 11 stages, then face the big bad at the 12th. While seemingly resolving the Pandemonium problem was a cool change of pace, seeing the giant complex just kind of manifest in the Icescope was pretty hype. At this point, I don't really know where this could possibly be going, but I'm certainly hyped to find out, and probably punch Athena in the face. Overall, I enjoyed this patch. It might have had some strange decisions concerning the between-event exploration periods, but aside from that, the battle and story content we were given was a lot of fun and says some really interesting things to come in the patches leading up to 7.0. And about Island Sanctuary and Hildebrand, I haven't really had the time to try them out, but they seem like they'll be fun. I guess expect some sort of rant if that happens not to be the case? Maybe? I don't know. Probably not. Hey, would you look at that? The end of the video. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. I always appreciate everyone who checks out my stuff, and I'm super grateful for you, kind viewer, for giving this video a shot. If you enjoyed the video, consider gently tapping the like button, and maybe also leaving a comment. Tell me what you thought of the patch yourself. Maybe it wasn't exactly what you were looking for, and you disagree with my generally positive appraisal. I'd love to hear other people's takes, and maybe we can have a conversation in the comments. If you really enjoyed my content, why not try ticking that subscribe button to get notified whenever I release something new? But if you're not quite certain yet, here's a video that's more in line with what I'm hoping to make more of. Anywho, I've got another project I'm working on and I've got to bounce. Thanks again for watching, and hopefully see you with my new project.